I want to read something to you. In January, one Bernie Sanders, diligent, sent this to the President of the United States. Our nation has always been a beacon of hope and refuge for the oppressed. As a country, we have a fundamental responsibility to keep families together and welcome those seeking refuge from extreme violence and persecution. I am therefore extremely disappointed that this weekend DHS began a large-scale raid in our communities to deport families who have made the perilous journey from extreme violence. Now, instead of raids, DHS should take measurable steps to protect children and families who have sought refuge, employing administrative relief to these vulnerable groups, such as gaining or granting temporary protective status. In the summer, we saw a wave of mothers and children arrive to the United States to escape extreme violence from Central America. These mothers fled because of gang murdering their husbands, targeting their sons for recruitment, and threatening their daughters with sexual violence. More than 80% of the migrant women detained were found to have credible threat to their safety and yet were returned home. Yet nearly 80% of these cases were ending with the DHS referring the same families to be deported back to the countries in very dangerous conditions from which they fled. Disturbingly, it has been reported that as many as 83 Central American immigrants recently denied asylum were murdered within months of their return. In April, same Sanders ends up sending this. America has always been a beacon of liberty for those fleeing violence and persecution. Raids separating families are not who we are. Deportation can be a death sentence to the detained minors, parents, and asylum seekers. Asking children as young as 3 to represent themselves in hearings is shameful. Miscarriage of justice that cannot be allowed to stand. Families deserve fair treatment and our compassion, not process rigged to expose them to danger. The cruel and inhumane imprisonment and deportation of Central American refugees who have been fleeing violence must end. The president should enact a moratorium on these raids as soon as possible. The arbitrary separation of families and the possible deportation of Wildin Acosta, a young teenager who fled Honduras after a gang member threatened to kill him, the Bangladeshi and South Asian asylum seekers currently in corporate prisons who are on hunger strike, and the pending deportation of Lealdo Spadala Ocacha, a father who has lived in Tennessee for almost 20 years, are wrong. They must be reunited with their families. We need an immigrant system that unites families, not one that tears them apart. Sanders wrote this in 2016. The first one that I mentioned to you about the deportations and the ICE and the raids took place in January 2016, official letter to Barack Obama. The second one about the family separation and again more raids took place April 2016 of the same year. That could have just as well been written today. When Jorge Ramos gets the opportunity to ask Joe Biden, who's been rubbing himself in Obama, did you try to tell Obama to not deport 3 million people? And did you try to get him to not engage in the process by which they were dealing with immigrants, meaning the Obama administration's immigration process, their policy? Did you try to stop him? Did you try to influence him? And do you share responsibility with what Obama was doing during his tenure as president? Again, what I just read to you could have just as well been written today. ICE raids and family separation today. Not to mention, when Biden is asked about this, Joe Biden lies about the notion of whether Obama was separating families. Not across the board, but he was. Joe Biden having a rough day at the debates. And Jorge Ramos asking Joe Biden something that Joe Biden doesn't want to answer. But yeah, fact is, if you're going to share in Obama's limelight, you're going to also have to deal with the stains. Joe Biden is answering a question about the Obama administration's policy on immigration. What do you think he says? Let's hear his answer. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back to this channel often, please like, share, subscribe, and of course, you can always support this content through PayPal Patreon. We like to say even $1 helps, since these videos get demonetized pretty much willy-nilly at this point. Joe Biden, on a debate stage. Joe Biden asked an uncomfortable question by Jorge Ramos that, as Jorge made the point even clear in the question, that he typically ignored, ran away from, and just completely blew off typically when asked. Well, you're on the debate stage, buddy, and the American public is asking, wants to know your answer to the question that this person is asking. Your administration deported 3 million people. Not to mention, I'm adding this in, not Jorge Ramos, the family plan, meaning the administration's plans. And yeah, as bad as Trump is, you all were also engaged in raids, and you were also engaged in family separation, maybe not necessarily to the degree of Trump, but raids, yes. And deportations outpace what Trump is doing. Are you responsible for that? Are you sorry that took place? Do you find that that's a problem or something you shouldn't have done? Do you share any blame at all? Did you whisper into Obama's ear and say, hey, maybe this is not the best path or approach to dealing with this particular issue? And again, Sanders, while Biden was in the administration that was doing this and going along with this particular policy, we're unaware if he was against this policy. I'm going to show you something else after I let you hear what Biden said on the stage. Sanders was pushing against the separation of immigrant children and families, while Biden was in an administration that was doing just that. Both of those letters took place under the Obama administration in 2016. Everybody cares about it now. Nobody cared about it when it was under Obama. Sanders cared about it. Hence, this record of support for their issues. Let's take a look at Biden's response. Jorge Ramos, Joe Biden, are you sorry? Do you have any issue with the deportations that took place under your watch, under Obama? Let's hear his answer.
As a presidential candidate in 2008, you supported the border wall, saying, unlike most Democrats, I voted for 700 miles of fence. This is what you said. Then you served as vice president in an administration that deported 3 million people, the most ever in U.S. history. Did you do anything to prevent those deportations? I mean, you've been asked this question before and refused to answer, so let me try once again. Are you prepared to say tonight that you and President Obama made a mistake about deportations? Why should Latinos trust you?
What Latinos should look at is comparing this president to the president we have is outrageous, number one. We didn't lock people up in cages. We didn't separate families. We didn't do all of those things, number one. Number two, by the time this is the president who came along with the DACA program. No one had ever done that before. This is the president who sent a legislation to the desk saying he wants to find a pathway for the 11 million undocumented in the United States of America. This is the president who's done a great deal. So I'm proud to have served with him. What I would do as president is several more things, because things have changed. I would, in fact, make sure.
Before we go too far into this, let's fact check that. There's no comparison between the two presidents. We've never locked people in cages. We weren't separating families. Fact check. Did the Obama administration separate families? Let's go to this part. Previous administrations used family detention facilities, allowing the whole family to stay together while awaiting deportation cases in immigrant court, or alternative detention would require families to be tracked but released from custody to await their court date. Some children may have been separated from adults they entered with. In cases where the family relationship could not be established, child trafficking was suspected, or there was not sufficient family detention facilities available. However, the zero tolerance policy is the first time that a policy resulting in separation is being applied across the board. The answer is yes. Some family deportations or separation did occur, just in the way they were out doing the policy. It wasn't across the board, but it did occur. What Biden just said there is not true. Jay Johnson, DHS Secretary under Obama, told NPR earlier this month that he couldn't say that family separations never happened during his tenure. There may have been some exigent situations, some emergency, There may have been some doubt about whether the adult accompanying the child was in fact the parent of the child. I can't say it never happened, but not as a matter of policy or practice. It's not something that I could ask our Border Patrol or immigrant enforcement personnel to do, Johnson said. The Obama administration faced a surge of unaccompanied children from Central America trying to cross the border in 2014. Celia Munoz, director of Obama administration's Domestic Policy Council, told the New York Times this month that a multi-agency team was considering every possible idea at the time, including separating families. I do remember looking at each other like, we're not going to do this, are we? We spent 5 minutes thinking this through and concluded it was a bad idea. The morality of it wasn't clear. That's not who we are. Brown told us that while the Obama administration did separate some families, it tried to detain families together. I hope you understand what I mean. The answer is yes. Even under the best light, the Obama administration was separating families under their policy. You can come up with all excuses as to why. I'm just saying they were. And by the way, they were looking at all of these answers because they were trying to figure out a way to stop the tide of migrants coming into the country. And one of the things they were thinking about doing is, if we separate families, would this be of enough of a reason for them not to come into the country if they know this is what we're doing? That, and what Trump is doing, whether you like it or not, the impetus of it, the core of it, the kernel of it, this notion that we need to stop people from coming into the country. And how are we going to stop people from coming into the country? Trump says, let's use a hammer. Let's use a club for people to come into the country to know that they're going to be treated poorly and in difficult situations. The Obama administration, in looking and even considering this, is essentially considering the same thing. We need to stop the tide of migrants. How are we going to do it? What are we going to do from the standpoint of policy to essentially make people not come here in the numbers that they're coming here? The kernel of it is similar, even though as a policy directive, Trump is just more grotesque. It's a tick to the right, but you're still talking in the same ballpark. I hope that's if you get my point. Meaning they're not so far apart where they're just, this is a radical idea. They are still in the same ballpark. Joe Biden standing on the stage indignant, angry that somebody brings this up, as if what they're asking him is somehow off the reservation. They did separate families. Whether it's across the border is besides the point. You did separate families. What you just said there was not true. And he asked you about the 3 million deportations that you and your administration was involved in, and whether or not you said anything to Obama to stop those deportations. You're answering something that wasn't necessarily asked. Again, blowing off the question and then giving falsehoods at that. There's something else I want to play for you, and I'm going to let Joe Biden continue in this. But what Joe Biden, listen to this, because I want you to policy for the moment. What Trump has been saying about the border stuff, no, not as grotesque as he's gone with it, and not the ICE raids and all this other stuff. Even though the Democratic Party has been boosting this now, like Trump is an ogre and all this other stuff, and I agree, Trump is utterly and entirely grotesque, and the policies he's been taking, but the Democratic Party wasn't that far away from Trump's policy on this. Look at those old debates with Clinton and Biden and Obama on that stage together, and what they're talking about with Obama policy, and they're talking about building a fence and building a wall and all this other stuff. At one point, this was Democratic position. At the point where Trump took this position and made it more grotesque, Democrats backed away from it as a particular policy. But this was their policy at one point. No, not ripping the babies from their mamas, but this was their policy. Listen to Obama. Trump agrees with this policy, by the way. Come on.
Enter the country illegally, and those who employ them disrespect the rule of law, and they are showing disregard for those who are following the law. We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked, and circumventing the line of people who are waiting patiently, diligently, and lawfully to become immigrants in this country.
All right, there's one other that I want you to hear. This one is Biden himself. Wait a minute. Right here. This was earlier than the prior video. This was back in 2006.
And because of a corrupt system that exists in Mexico, there is the 1% of the population at the top, a very small middle class, and the rest is abject poverty. Folks,
everyone in that room is white and old. Look at that. They're probably donors. Let's keep going.
Voted for a fence. I voted, unlike most Democrats, and some of you won't like it, I voted for 700-mile fence. But let me tell you, we can build a fence 40 stories high, unless it changes the dynamic in Mexico. And you will not like this, and punish American employers who knowingly violate the law when in fact they hire illegals. Unless you do those two things, all the rest is window dressing.
I want you to notice something else. This is a different Biden. He's stronger. He looks like a different person. He looks far more vigorous than the man who's standing on the debate stage right now. Now, mind you, this was 12 years ago. He looks ancient in this video, so you can imagine he's that much more ancient. Notice he said illegals, and the terminology that he's using, he's being pretty hawkish on this front. This will surprise you. I don't entirely disagree with what Joe Biden is saying there. In one part, there is something to be said about what is taking place in South America and Central American countries. However, what is always missing in that discussion is American foreign policy in those countries that has turned those countries into basket cases. It wasn't like those countries just became basket cases all by themselves. We were murdering or outright working with gangs of and warlords and kill squads, destabilizing those countries. Not to mention in Chile, Allende, knocked off. In Guatemala, in Honduras. In Honduras recently, by the way. I mean, I guess I'm making the point that El Salvador and many of those countries, we have been directly involved in undermining the governments of those countries, especially when those countries have wanted to do anything from the standpoint of social justice in the context of those countries. We have had a direct hand in doing operations, either CIA, either clandestine, in some cases direct and outright. In the case of Guatemala, if I'm not mistaken, the CIA was working with groups there, but ended up bombing the Capitol building and trying to get that guy out of office. It hasn't been a situation where they're basket cases by themselves. If you're talking about something like a Marshall Plan in order to update, to fix, to give back and restore those particular areas in South America to make sure those particular countries are sufficient and suitable for the living situations of the people who are there, then okay, we can talk. But right now, how does that work? How does the money get used? How do you assist those countries? Because in many cases, those governments are basket cases, and some repart as a result of our actions in those countries. All that stuff becomes somewhat difficult and dicey to do, but I am making the point that there has to be some way of balancing out those particular societies. Otherwise, those people, logically, mind you, working for their own self-interests, will come here. If we were in their situation, we would do the exact same thing. Just saying. So I don't necessarily hate this notion of we have to take into account what is taking place on the border that is driving people to come to the country. However, the secondary point of building the wall and stuff, that becomes a little bit dicey and you start to lose me. And Joe Biden is only talking about one side of that particular equation. My only point in this is this speech is not that far off from what Donald Trump is talking about. Maybe not ripping babies from their mamas, but what is the way this is going to be executed? And from the standpoint of the Democratic Party, Obama's execution of this ended up, yes, separating children and separating families. I'm just pointing out that what Joe Biden said there was false. That's all. And that what he said there was not that, like, what Trump is doing is not that far from Democratic policy. That's all I'm getting at. He's bristling at the question. Well, don't bristle, buddy. You have a history. And not just you have a history. Obama, the administration that you were in, has a history. There's something else in this. Julian Castro has been bullying Joe Biden all night. In this thing, Joe Biden makes the point that, look, I was just the vice president. You can't hold me responsible for what Obama did. Now, this is astonishing because in every other situation, he wants to take credit for what Obama was doing. Julian Castro doesn't let him get away with that. Listen to this and watch this exchange. It's awesome.
That we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come. I would change the order that the president just changed, saying women who were being beaten and abused could no longer claim that as a reason for asylum. And by the way, retrospectively, the 25th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act is up. The Republican Congress has not reauthorized it. Let's put pressure.
That has nothing to do with the question. And Joe Biden has been doing that all night. Like, in this kind of a weird rambling thing, and then going into areas like these tangents. And I know I have a tendency to go into tangents. I think my tangents are awesome. His tangents often have nothing to quite do with what they're talking about. Keep in mind, he's asked about the 3 million people that you have deported, or Obama deported, that you were in the Obama administration, the Obama-Biden deportations. Did you try to stop him? Did you say anything about it? Do you share some level of responsibility for it? And right now, he's talking about the Violence Against Women Act. What does that have to do with the immigration thing? Let him finish.
Pressure on them to pass the Violence Against Women Act now.
But you didn't answer the question.
Well,
the question is, did you make a mistake with those deportations?
The president did the best thing that was able to be done at the time.
How about you?
I'm the vice president of the United States.
Later in the debate, Julian Castro.
Be done at the
How about
time.
you?
I'm the vice president of the United States.
Later in the debate.
With Vice President Biden, and Corey pointed this out last time, is every time something good about Barack Obama comes up, he says, oh, I was there. That's me too. And then every time somebody questions part of the administration that we were both part of, he says, well, that was the president. I mean, he wants to take credit for Obama's work, but not have to answer to any questions.
Pretty much. I mean, Julian Castro has been bullying Joe Biden all night. And I love that very specific zinger of you want to take credit for everything Obama does. However, you don't want to take any of the faults. And in this case, you're in a Democratic primary. This primary tends to be a tick to the left. If you're running in the general, might not be that big of a deal. I mean, after all, people put Trump in office. However, you're not in the general yet. You're running in the Democratic primary. And as a representation of the primary, a part of this electorate is Hispanic. A large part of the electorate is Hispanic. And you want to know that the person who's going to go there is going to fight for their interests. Part of their interests is not having people in cages or deportations or raids or family separations, all of which took place under your administration also, even though it might not have been to the degree, that's fair. And it wasn't necessarily a policy across the board, meaning the family separation policy. That is also fair. But it did take place. And saying on a debate stage and bristling at a question about, are you okay with it? Do you feel like you've changed? Not necessarily the best look, especially since you entirely dodged the question. It's a fair question. No, Joe Biden didn't answer that question. And yes, it's a good thing that Julian Castro was there to slam Biden for not answering that question. I also want you to firmly have in your mind that while we're talking about this today, while the immigration thing has become a big deal today under the Trump administration, again, despite the fact that Obama had similar policies on this, and despite the fact those grotesque raids were taking place, we care about it today. Keep firmly in your mind that we care about it today. And while you keep firmly in your mind that we care about it today, also keep firmly in your mind that the person who cared about it when the rest of the world wasn't caring about it was Sanders. April 2016 press release that was under Obama. January 2016 press release. Pretty much the same press release. Talking about the raids and the number of people who were being killed after they were being sent back to their country. Again, we're talking about 1, Bernie Sanders. This was not a good debate for Joe Biden. Honestly. He was slower. He was somewhat out of it. He seemed glazy-eyed in many of the answers that he was given. And not just that, some of the answers were magnificently incoherent. Many of them he just dodged or tried not to answer, or couldn't keep the thread in regards to what he was saying in it. Again, this is a cognitive thing. And for the third debate, got absolutely outright bullied by somebody who was there. He does not look like a front runner, even though right now he's still considered to be the front runner. I strongly suspect Biden is going to flame out, and one poor debate performance after the next gets me to believe that I am right in that assessment. Biden, his time. Everything Joe has to say about immigration and indigenous people is quote unquote off the reservation, because that's where his policies want them. Off the reservation. I like that. Giovanna Levana, Bernie Nina 2020! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Vicious E. Jamarl, you can't have an honest or you can't have a substantive conversation about immigration without first addressing violence against women, I think. So that's fair. I mean, yes and no. Biden is asking a question about immigration. Are you okay with the 3 million people that are being deported under the time that you were working with Obama? That's the question. Anything else that's the answer has to come in within the context of that question. Telling me about violence against women doesn't quite get it, seeing as you deported 3 million people back to countries where they were fleeing rape and violence and killings and all sorts of stuff, gang recruitment. The moment that the administration is kind of making a point to Obama's administration, look, many of the people you sent back are being killed. Maybe you need to have a rethink about the immigration policy that you guys have been going off with. That's the context of the question. Joe Biden runs away from this, doesn't respond to this, and goes into this notion that Republicans need to file against the Violence Against Women Act. Yes, I agree with you. Maybe they should. I agree with you, just in general, just on principle. Yeah, they probably should. But what does it have to do about the 3 million deportations that you guys were involved in that was more than anybody else? I mean, after all, they're asking this guy wants to be in office. I don't want him to be in office because I don't necessarily think he's representative of what I want to be espoused into the larger world. Right now, he's being questioned on policies that he was a part of enacting because he was part of the Obama administration. He wants to cover himself in Obama while at the same token distancing himself from Obama for things he don't particularly like. That two-step doesn't necessarily fly. Are you okay with the 3 million deportations that took place under your administration? And there are many of these people who were sent back to countries, denied asylum, even though they had credible asylum claims, and were killed in their home country. Was that a mistake? Are you okay with it? You telling me about the Violence Against Women Act? Yes, it should be signed. Okay, let's put that to the side. That has nothing to do with the deportations. Violence against women is important. I hope you understand me. That's like me saying, hey, do you care about immigration? And, are you sorry about the 3 million immigrants that you deported? Look, we got to do something about automated cars because all those people are going to lose their jobs. And when people lose their jobs like that, that's bad for the economy. Our society needs to change to accommodate the fact that those people are going to potentially lose their jobs as a result of that automation. And the last thing we want is workers to be against or be fighting against the technology. We need to address that in our society. Now, what just happened there? Yes, what I said is true. What I said is completely true. You may even entirely agree with what I just said, but it has nothing to do with the question that you just asked. Joe Biden said something that might have been true, but again, it had nothing to do with the question. Just because you can nod your head yes to what he said doesn't necessarily mean that yes applies to the question that he was asked. The reason that Jorge Ramos asked the question again was because it has nothing to do with what he was asked. It's a dodge. It's not that what he said is not yes or right. It's what he said doesn't apply. I hope you understand what I mean. I hope you get my point. You deported 3 million people. Was that right? Did you say anything to Obama about it? We need to sign the Violence Against Women Act. We need to get that passed. Yeah, I can agree with that. That's true. Go Star. Let's put that to the side for the moment. Can you answer the question that I asked? Look, it boils down to this. Are you okay with that many deportations? And what is your policy on that stuff? And do you believe the policy should have been enacted that way? And should you have said something to Obama to stop it? That's all. Thing is, do you believe that what he just said, though, answers that? Or is it a dodge? And based on previous Democratic policy, where these guys were deporting, it was their policy. And not just their policy, it would have been Clinton's policy. It would have been Obama's policy. Or it was Obama's policy. And it most likely would have been Biden's policy. It became the flashpoint when Trump was in office, and they could attract Trump for it. But the policy wasn't that dramatically different from what Trump was talking about. Trump wanted to build the wall. Biden wanted to build the wall. Clinton wanted to build the wall. Were they talking about family separation? Not as an entire policy, but were they doing it? Yes. The tax, I hope they're still in the same ballpark, even if what he's saying is not as drastic. And Jorge Ramos's point is, are you wrong for that? Was that the wrong policy? Now you're in a debate. You have other people who disagree with you. Were you wrong in the policies that you guys were enacting? And Joe Biden can't bring himself to hit Obama because he is tethered to Obama. And so he dances and he dances and he dances. And yeah, it's a bad dance. It's a bad dance. All right. And by the way, I'm not, if we're having a conversation about the border and so forth, I am not one of those people who believe in open borders. And if you say we should have security at our borders, yes, you have my agreement. Yes, I agree. If you say we need to strengthen security at our borders because we need to know who's coming across and not, again, I agree. If you get to this thing of you're separating babies from their moms and you're putting people in cages, no, I don't agree. And we'll probably even disagree about the amount of immigration that we can tolerate in the country. I don't necessarily think we're bursting at the seams of immigrants, nor do I think immigrants make our country worse. I think they make that country better. And nor do I think these kind of raids where you're disappearing people is a positive aspect of our society. I think that's a negative factor in our society. I think it breeds a certain degree of distrust, not to mention what takes place in these raids is utterly deplorable. So, not to mention, again, going back to this thing of why people come to the country, we've had a certain influence in South America, and that influence has not necessarily been to the betterment of South America. We never own that, though. We address that as if it's purely a problem for South America. Well, they're fleeing and they're coming into that country for rational reasons. And if that is true and they are coming for rational reasons, then maybe you have to deal with that. Well, we don't like to deal with that because we have our myths and we have our beliefs, and we don't necessarily want to deal with the reality that we had bad ends in those countries, and those countries are negative or has come to bad result because of it. It's like both are true, right? In fact, all of those things are true. The question becomes, how do you deal with the issue? Are you going to rip babies from their mamas? Are you going to send more judges to the border? Are you going to relax certain claims for asylum, especially in cases where there's reason and legitimate cause? Are you going to deal with the DACA recipients? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? That's essentially the question that is being asked. And do you regret the way you went about it prior? That is not, however, what Joe Biden answers. And yes, shout out to Julian Castro, who I strongly suspect will get a bump in the polls for the bullying of Joe Biden that has taken place. Truly, no borders. See, I don't believe in the no border stuff. I just don't buy it. But again, this stuff is debatable. And by the way, I don't buy. Sometimes lefties get into their heads that everybody who have conversations about the border are racist. I don't buy that at all. People can have legitimate conversations about immigration and not necessarily be racist. You can be a lefty and still say, look, a country that is going to have certain social services and so forth can't necessarily have open borders because there's a certain social services have to be paid for, and if the system is overtaxed, like the argument works even from the standpoint of the left. So, I don't necessarily think you have to be racist and all that other stuff to have this conversation about the border. So I'm not in that particular camp, despite some lefties that try to cast all immigration conversations as being everybody's being racist and sexist and all this other nonsense. By the same token, it's funny. I had a conversation with a guy and I was like, look, people can have honest conversations about the border and not be racist about it. He says, really, you think so? It's like, you honestly believe that everybody that has a conversation about immigration is racist? It's like, come on, dog. Come on. Let's be honest. Borders are a control method. Yes and no. Yes and no, right? I mean, look, you have... I am not a major fan of the capitalistic system. And yet I worship at the altar when I need to get something to eat, when I need to get coffee from Starbucks, when I am, buying a new computer so I can do the show that I'm doing, when I am getting paid from Google or whatever. It's like, regardless of what you think, you still worship and bow at the altar. You can dislike capitalism, but you're still going to bow and worship. It's God. My point is this. In the same way that we are having this conversation about borders, whatever you feel about borders, you're in the context of a system. That system has certain logic and rules that go around it and to make that system work. And if you ignore that system, and if you ignore somewhat just kind of a logic that goes along with certain policy based on ideological reasons, you will suffer. There is nothing in the cosmos that makes your ideology line up with reality itself. Meaning, this notion of blowing away borders and what that would mean from the context of the country itself, the services within the context of that country, and not just that, but the populace itself that will get angry at you and have a severe backlash when all of the negative consequences from blowing away borders come to pass. If you were in a different society, yes. If you're in a society where each society to some degree is somewhat level economically, where you could go from one point to another and still for the most part feel that you're in the context of a modern society, then the borders aren't that major of a deal. But you have legal structures in place, you have political structures in place, you have social structures in place, and each of these regions have those things that are in place. And this notion that you're going to pretend like the borders doesn't exist, what happens? I mean, if you look at the EU and you have millions of people flooding into one country after the next because they don't have borders and they don't have control of their borders, and you have the people and the populations in those countries freaking the fuck out, I suggest to you that the same will take place here. You are not at a point in a societal context or situation that can be done, especially with the country that you have, the perspectives within the country that you have. It just doesn't work. It's like me saying, I want to blow away cash. Great. How does that work? I can't see how that works right now. I honestly don't see how the blowing away the borders thing works either. Granted, borders was always less good and less cost efficient than public libraries, but it was preferable. Balthazar, yes. Anthony Reyes, Balthazar, the government profits off of the cheap labor, yes. Locking up immigrants, yes. Deporting them and stealing resources whence they came, yes, that's true. That's a governmental stance, or that's a policy position that the government has taken from the standpoint of South America and now in the Middle East. That's true. I guess that's my point. My point is, you kind of make my point. If you have caused havoc in those countries, and you know you've caused havoc in those countries, and you know you've destabilized those governments, or you put in fascist governments, or right-wing governments, or authoritarian, or dictators that have essentially set those countries back decades and raped and plundered and taken the resources from those countries, then to some degree you have a certain share of the responsibility in the chaos and the trouble that those people find themselves in those countries. This notion that you're going to shut the border down and rip kids away and all this other stuff and pretend as if the problems of those countries are entirely those countries. Yeah, that takes a certain degree of ignoring historical context in order to make that opinion works. Now, that opinion does work from an American perspective when you don't want to delve into that stuff or deal with those issues and you just want to tell people to get lost. An honest accounting of that, not so much. Biden is touching on that in one part, but not entirely, because he's not going into U.S. influence. A Marshall Plan in that area in order to grade those countries, maybe, and in which point you can kind of, make this argument of how do we deal with people flooding into the country? Well, maybe you deal with it by ensuring they have a country where they don't need to flood out of. But that's never really talked about. All right. I'm going to end this. Giovanna Lavana, federal taxes do not fund federal spending. Yes. Yes-ish. The government makes money. The government makes money. And fact of the matter is we can pay for whatever we want to pay for as such. Not to mention, for the time being, we are the reserve currency. It's unclear how long that lasts. That is not an absolute. I mean, it is true that we pay, we essentially print money. The government deems it so, at which point these things are paid. And taxes is one of those things that either pulls money out of the economy or essentially takes the heat off an economy of sorts. But that's not really the way people understand it. And that's not the way it's usually argued. So fair enough. That would blow people's mind as an argument. That's the MMT argument. That would blow people's mind, Shilovamata. It would be hard to make that argument to a society that for the last, hundreds of years have been juiced into this notion that we're a gold-backed currency. Well, we're not. We're fiat. We're just off the rails. It's not real. There's nothing backing it. It's just the faith and the confidence of the American government that backs that currency itself. Yes. Yeah, I'm rambling, but yeah, you're right. To some degree, you're right. I don't consider it an absolute, but trying to make that argument is a tough one. I'm submitting a question for the next debate. You inspired me, Jamal. Where have all the haberdashers gone? That needs to be put out there. Joe Biden needs to answer that one also. Read your super chats. I'm reading my super chats. In fact, I've read all my super chats. Oh, Jay Scott, read my message, please. What's your message, Jay? I only have 4. Bernie 2020, Jay Scott, read my next message, please. Giovanni Lavana, federal taxes do not fund federal spending. And Aisha Hollingsworth, read your super chats. That was literally all of my super chats. Yeah, that's all of them. I haven't missed any. Jamal, that's MMT. Yeah, I know. I just said that was MMT. That was MMT perspective. All right. Let's see. Maybe Jay says something that wasn't a super chat. Justice for Jay. Okay, what's justice? Justice for Jay. What is justice for Jay? Why is there justice for Jay? My super chat. I don't see any additional super chats. Unless it wasn't on this video. Hold on. Maybe I missed one. And maybe it wasn't on this video. And I'll end it on Jay Scott's question because I'm seeing a justice for Jay stuff. All right. All of the super chats. Cat Purple. Biden literally said that he wants to send social workers into black families to teach them how to raise their children. Pop reality. Biden is subconsciously racist. Motherfucker. Hashtag facts. Burning a guillotine. You covered the Sinclair commercial during the ABC Democratic debate. Burning AOC in effigy mass graves. Texas District 128 representative tweeting death threats to Beto. Burning a guillotine in which Gravel was there to ask Biden if social workers should come along and played radio to help teach him how to keep his son off of crack. Manitalk, let's do a show. Pop reality, Biden will wonder how Jamal became so articulate. Giovanni Lavana, Bernie Nina 2020. J. Scott, read my next message, please. Giovanni Lavana, federal taxes do not fund federal spending. And Aisha Thomas, read your super chats. Bam, that's all of them. That's everything. So this whole justice for Jay stuff. Get out of here. All right. Like, share, subscribe. Jay, put your thing up on the next video. I don't see a super chat under it. We won't take the abuse anymore. Hashtag justice for Jay. You did not send a super chat, dude. I read every last super chat that I got. This is a false flag. This is a false flag. Here we are. I have a video presentation of modern monetary theory for lavender greens. Please check it out. Giovanna, I've had on several people talking about MMT. And I've even gone over Richard Wolff talking about MMT. Look, I don't disagree with the premise, right? Taxes don't fund federal spending. For the most part, federal spending is done by the government willing it so. What we have taxes in the federal budget is essentially kind of like a goalkeeper in regards to the amount of money that is coming in or going out. But the government essentially, we're sovereign currency. We deem it paid. The government makes cash. And as such, we can always pay our bills. Alan Greenspan was asked this question, and Alan Greenspan answered it in the exact same way. There is no issue with the American government being able to pay its bills. We can do so. We have put $29 trillion into the economy from the standpoint of the banks. This notion that we can't fund either healthcare or education or anything else for that matter is utterly ludicrous. We make dollars. We make dollars. And not just make dollars, we have tax policy. We have, we can raise taxes. There's all sorts of policy positions that you can take in order to pay for anything that you want to do. We are a sovereign currency. We are a sovereign nation. It is our choice. It is our choice. It is true that we're part of the money markets. And this is where MMT, where I disagree with some of this stuff. The restraint is not so much what we as a currency or country can do. It's more so our entanglements within financial markets and the system to which we use in order to kind of take this position on this stuff. The public itself has a certain position or perspective of finance. That perspective is not entirely correct, and yet it's a perspective nonetheless. It's even the perspective that Washington and the media, for the most part, go with. Making an argument that we are a sovereign currency, even though it's entirely true, and that we can always pay our debts, even though it is entirely true, is always something that's difficult to do, and politicians don't necessarily hit on it. They're always somewhat a little bit behind it. I mean, even though Sanders had, what's her name, on his staff, Stephanie Kelton, still, it wasn't something that was in the forefront, but it was something clearly part of Sanders' policies. So MMT, yes. Part of it, yes, is a perspective on currency, a perspective on finance. None of it's real. So I don't necessarily care how you come up with, what system, what stupid human project or what gimmick that you use in order to come up with a way to pay for this or pay for that. I don't care. None of it's real. Money isn't real. Currency isn't real. None of that stuff is absolutely real. So who cares? Just come up with something, give it a theory, and run with it. That's the only way. That's the way our current system is run anyway. It is a Ponzi scheme that allows some people at the top to get rich at the expense of people at the bottom. Come up with a different Ponzi scheme. I don't care. Like, people this is yes, MMT, as if it's a real thing. It's not a real thing. It's a position. It's a perspective on finance. Okay, go with your perspective on finance. I don't care. Is everybody covered? Yay or nay? Beyond everybody being covered, does everybody have health care? Yay or nay? Can everybody go to school? Yay or nay? Are we expanding and building out our society? Do we have MagRail? Do we have Hyperloop? Do our society grow in a way that is not held up by plutocrats? If all of those things are true, then I could care less. I want it to be sustainable, yes. I want it to be something that can be used in perpetuity, yes. I don't necessarily want to be crisis every 5 years, yes. But I don't care about how that's accomplished. Or I care less, let's say it that way. Don't get me wrong, I don't want it to be run on the backs of babies, so there's that. But all things being equal, I don't necessarily care the system that you come up with when none of the systems are in real terms real. I hope you understand my point. Hyperloop is nonsense. Hyperloop is not nonsense. You can build those things. I mean, going from California to Washington, D.C. as opposed to flying. I mean, think about flying for the moment. You're literally getting in a tube with boosters on the side and flying very high up into the air, going from point A to point B, as opposed to a device that allows you to go from point A to point B over land at just as fast, if not faster speeds. Give me the Hyperloop any day of the week. Hell, you can even put that shit underwater. So, it's like Hyperloop. This nonsense. Get out of here. All right. I am going to end this. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all. I'll see you in a few, probably later tonight.